Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I'm really happy to be here with Maya Rodale and Caroline Linden to talk about the dangerous book for girls. We are going to really dive into why romance is poo-pooed by so many people and what's that all about. But before we get to that, I would like to do a couple things. One is to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library who support all of our programming, and to thank a bunch of libraries who partnered with us on this one. And you can see some of the names coming through. But I always say when libraries work together, we can create magic, and we kind of have tonight. So I would like to welcome the patrons of Ashland, of course, and Clinton, Lowell, Tewksbury, Manchester, Rowley, Belmont, Hopkinton, Lexington, Marlborough, Northampton, Spencer, and Canton. So glad you're all here, and I hope you have a great night. I do want to say that you can buy books from Maya and Caroline signed by bookplate from Bank Square Books, and also from Maya's website, because the Dangerous Book of Girls is on Maya's website, and she can send it to you signed. So I'll put the links for that in the chat as we go on. I am going to ask for people to put your questions in the Q&A so I can keep a track of them, and any chatter, anything you want to say in the chat. So welcome. Okay, I'm so excited about this. First of all, Maya is just an amazing writer, best-selling, award-winning, funny feminist fiction and historical romance. So she knows of what she speaks. Caroline, I'm going to say this right, was born a reader, not a writer. Last time I put the accent or the emphasis in the wrong place. And she's also got a degree in math. So I'll be really curious about your journey to being writing dangerous books. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Carolyn is also a best-selling and award-winning author and one of my favorites.
Sorry, I should have led with that.
You see why I like being in programs with Maya?
I can see. Thank you for that. Yes, both of you are just amazing writers who have been doing this for a while and have made an impact in the community of romance readers. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves? Because of course my introductions are always slightly lame, because I think it's more interesting to hear from you than from me. So I'm going to start with Caroline, and then we'll go to Maya, and then we'll have a conversation.
My introduction is not very exciting at all, because I did not think I wanted to write anything, like including required term papers, until I was close to 30, I think. I had 2 small children, and we had just moved to a new town. The only thing in town, literally, that I could find was a library, which was 2 blocks from my house, and I could put the kids in the stroller, go there, and have approximately 10 minutes to just plow down the aisles, going like scoop and throwing all the books, all the romance novels I could find into the bottom of the stroller. So that's how I really got hooked as an adult reading them. And then, you know, when you have small children, sometimes you are, shall we say, left alone with your own thoughts as the only semi-adult conversation you'll have. And when you're pushing on the swings and digging in the sandbox, I sometimes would think, well, how is the book that I'm in the middle of reading, how is that going to end? And then it turned into, well, how do I think it should end? And sometimes I was disappointed. So finally, I decided I would write a book of my own, but I was going to be a mystery, because I really like mystery novels too. And unfortunately, my mystery turned out to be how long until the heroine kisses the guy who may or may not be the killer. So I realized that what I really wanted to write was a romance with some mystery instead of a mystery with a little bit of romance. And so that's what I did. And then I met great friends like Maya, who totally encouraged all of my instincts in that direction. And no matter what wacky plot idea we come up with, Maya's like, oh, go for it, that would be awesome. She is the biggest enabler and cheerleader in the world, and that's why I love her.
We all need a Maya in our life then.
Yes. Here.
Well, oh my God, swooning. We all need a Caroline, because she's who I turn to when I need brainstorming help. I try to go to my husband, and he just tells me to have more drama with the hero and his fathers and father and issues there. And I'm like, I don't know that that's what my readers are here for. So then I call Caroline and we talk through that. And I think, so she's the one that's good at math, but I was trying to do the math tonight. I think we met like 12 or 13 years ago.
It was a while ago. It's a
When-
long time ago. I don't even remember when. I just feel like we're like sisters, like I've known each other forever. I can't remember a time before I didn't have Maya.
I remember meeting you and we bonded over being the petite brown haired
Yes, the short brown hair girls. Us
party.
with Galen Foley.
Kind of like the wallflowers at that party. And
we kind of were the drunk wallflowers wandering around laughing at our own jokes.
and here we are.
You're like a Lisa Kleypas book come to life.
Pretty much, except without tons of hot guys following us.
Well, yeah. So let's dig into dangerous books. Because I'm just so fascinated with this whole thing. What made you write this, Maya?
So as you may have guessed, I've been in romance landia like some time now. And I don't know if anyone here remembers, but there used to be blogs and with comments on the blogs and you would like go check them and someone would say like, oh, romance readers like don't know fact from fiction. Romance readers are like stupid and lame. And I would write these like, you'd lose a morning like writing these comments and whatever. And I was like, at some point I was like, I should probably write a book about this. But the content of my angry blog comment replies came from a lot of studying I did because I started reading romance novels when my mom told me to when I was in college, because I was studying women writers and late female characters in English literature. And she just pointed out I had to read romance. And I was like, no, those are stupid books for stupid people. And I'm like an English major. So obviously I got over that and completely changed my opinion. But I started to wonder eventually like why I had that instinct when, I didn't really know romance novels. I didn't know any romance readers besides my mom, who I loved and respected and still do. So I've been digging into it in my studies and thinking about it and reading so much. And I don't know, it's like when you're a writer, you got to get it out of your head onto the page. And so that was the origin of that book. And it started as my master's thesis, and then I rewrote it to be less boring. But I kept
not boring.
Thank you. But it's interesting that you said that you sort of like was like, oh, romance is stupid, because I made an assumption that maybe Caroline would think that romance is stupid because she's got to take care of her dog. She can't hear me.
Hi, doggy.
I should put her earplugs back on. Okay. So I was saying that I made an assumption that Caroline would think that romance might have been stupid because you were a math major. And I feel like, people in the sciences and maths are much more, they have a different perspective about things. So that's really interesting because Caroline, it doesn't sound like you ever denigrated romance.
No, I just want to get up front. I went to a very snooty school. I went to Harvard. And so I was surrounded by people who were incredibly smart, smarter than I was for the most part. And my roommate, Julie, was actually the one who really showed me the way. We would go to the bookstore and we would head for the bargain table. She would go straight to the bargain table where the books were like, 50 cents or $1. I can't even remember, whatever. And it was just miles and miles of, romance novels and other stuff. But she went for the romance novels. And I watched her one day. Is this somebody who would read like Middlemarch and then write a 20-page paper overnight and get an A? And I would just be like, are you a witch? Like, seriously, how do you do that? And she's like, no, we're going here to the bookstore, to the Borders. It was Borders for the fun reading. And I said, how do you know which ones to choose? And she says, you pick the ones with the best dress on the cover. And I was like, so no, there was nothing bad about it. To this day, when people say they get grief for reading or writing romance novels, I don't see it now. And later in life, everybody I knew became a lawyer, so I'm surrounded by lawyers all the time. And when we're at events or parties or just chatting with people and hanging out, people find out what I do. I say I write historical romance novels. They're like, oh man, I wish I could write a book. That's like my dream, to write a book. And I'm like, go for it. You know? Like, I don't see any of the, I really haven't gotten very much of the, oh, you write what? When are you going to write a real book? Like, no one's ever said that to me. So I know there is a definitely a piece of society that does, but I have been very fortunate in that they haven't had the guts to say it to my face.
So I'm gonna ask the audience actually if they've had any experience of somebody saying, "Oh, I can't believe you read romance." I'm gonna raise my hand and say I've had lots of people say that to me.
Really?
So Maya, what was basically your maybe thesis about? Like what was no thesis conclusion?
Well, so the interesting thing to me in studying like the origin of the novel, and this is going to answer your question, is that a lot of snark was just from the beginning directed at the novel as a format itself. And then women started doing it. And so it was wrapped up like it's a lot of the snark about romance is really a disdain about women, and then just cheap literature, mass literature. And I want to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with cheap. I think part of romance's superpower is its accessibility, and I love that about it. Because good books should be for everybody. But it's the whole like Oscar movie versus blockbuster movie. It's your, hardcover fancy pants Pulitzer novel, and then like what Caroline and I write, which people actually read more and enjoy more. But so that kind of attitude isn't just about romance. I think there's a attitude that favors high culture and low culture, and I think it's all relative there. So my thesis conclusion is that a lot of the angst about romance isn't about romance per se, but about, how we value culture, how we value women, how we value what women have to say. And I want to expand that now to say, it's not just women who read and write romance. And it's not just story, it's so much broader and more inclusive than that. And if it isn't, it should be.
Mm-hmm.
I think also some of the focus on the anti-romance crowd is that it's about feelings. It's about having a robust and healthy emotional life, about being able to make real connections with other people, opening yourself up and being vulnerable. And I think that gets mocked a fair amount in our society, especially with guys and, some section of women who are like, you have to be tough. And, I am an island and I am a rock. And to write a whole story where you focus on the emotional life of these characters, whatever else is going on in the story, I don't know, I guess it sort of suggests that is viewed as like a weak story, which is funny because falling in love is something that most people want to do. Like, most people do not want to discover a dead body in their backyard. Most people do not want to get chased by the mob or aliens, or, drop through a wormhole into an alternate universe where, they're being hunted for food, or whatever else happens in all these, amazing other stories. Like, they're incredible stories, but you don't really want all that stuff to happen to you. But if you say to somebody, did you always want to meet somebody, to find a partner, to have your person or persons where you just know you are accepted, you are loved, you are valued? Most people will say, yeah. So it's kind of funny to me that the one thing that most people actually would like to happen to them in real life are the stories that they tend to dismiss, if they're going to dismiss any stories.
That's an amazing point about that, and the emotional vulnerability too, because it's also the probably scariest thing any one of us will do on any given day is to put ourselves out there, to really open up, to examine uncomfortable feelings or all feelings or any feelings. Because that's what our characters have to do. Like in a really good romance, you put them through the ringer, and the more stuff they have to feel and work through, the better the book. It's scary.
But what about that word dangerous? Why is it considered dangerous?
So I came up with this title on a whim, but it came from this idea early on in like the 19th century that novels were dangerous for women because they were so delicate and impressionable, and it would give them these like ideas about life. So it was thought that they were dangerous books for girls. But what I really think they are is like books that are dangerous to the status quo. We celebrate emotional vulnerability, connection, win-win, equality, love. All of these things can really be threatening to some people.
I know there's, of course, I will never be able to find it now, but there's a cartoon from the 1800s where it's a young bride. She's just married and she's with her husband and she's begging him to buy her. I think it's Tom Jones, which was a very, very popular novel back then, full of adventure and wild stuff happening. And she's begging him. She's like, please, please, Mama said I couldn't read it until I got married. And now I'm married. Will you please buy it for me, honey? And so it does. Maya's exactly right. Novels were considered bad news. I'm not 100% sure why, but I think certainly for women, it's because when in that world where women did not have a lot of rights and were expected to fulfill a certain role, which was generally fairly subservient to the men in her family, whoever those men were, son, father, husband, the novels of like the Brontes, Jane Austen, like those presented a woman's life as something that that was hers, and that she had a right to find her own happiness as well. And it wasn't entirely about, you need to learn to be a good wife and a good mother, and that's what you're going to do for the end of your days, and your husband will be the one who goes out and has a great career and does diplomacy or business or invention or whatever. You're going to be at home taking care of all the babies. And then if you're fortunate, your children will grow up and your sons will become inventors and diplomats and ambassadors and stuff like that. And in a novel, it was more like, well, no. Elizabeth Bennet manages to marry a very, very eligible man, but it's not because he's eligible or because she's fulfilling her role. It's because she likes him. She falls in love with him, and she realizes that he's in love with her, and he's going to value her as an equal, as a fully fledged independent person of her own, with her own thoughts and feelings. And so I guess in a world where a lot of people had seriously vested interest in women fulfilling a very narrow, limited role, to give them any hint that there was more out there for them, and that there were some people who weren't just doing it themselves, but were essentially sending up, semaphore code. You can do it too. Hello, girl. I guess they probably did view that as like a shot across the bow of, the patriarchy and the, social order that benefited them.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, like, with a novel where a heroine is the focus, it says she's interesting and valuable for like hundreds of pages and worth money. And then women were often writing them from the beginning, and now they were getting an independent income. And so it really was a way like these cracks in the foundation of patriarchy, I think.
Wow. So, and what about the, so there's this concept of, men don't want women to know the potential of happiness or sexual gratification or any of that stuff. But what about this concept of this is women writing for women? And so that there's this whole sort of like denigrating of that, like, oh, it's just for women.
Well, so not all men.
No, of course not.
But yeah, no, I mean, like, an interesting thing to me and a lot of my reading and studying is what few opportunities like women kind of had to get together and talk amongst themselves. They couldn't really talk in mixed company. You weren't invited to like a lot of the clubs until like the later 1800s and stuff, when women developed a club culture. But and you know, and before that, you were kind of constrained by like who was in physical distance with you a little bit, of who you could associate with. So I think with these books, you could write about your own female experience, and another woman somewhere far, far away could read about it. And now you're kind of in conversation with each other, or you could use that book to start a conversation with a friend you wouldn't maybe otherwise bring up. It prompts ideas. So I think the books worked like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think they still do. Look at how many of us read a romance novel and like the sex scenes, talk about how the characters treat each other. And then that lets us talk about values and what we like and don't like and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
On the idea of women writing for women, like, first of all, a lot of what I think women tend to write about and know best, certainly in centuries past, is their own experience as a woman. Very few women got to experience what it was like to be a man and have that level of freedom and independence, but they could write about being a woman, and there were still ways, obviously, to find happiness and joy in those roles. And so, you know, they were writing books about that. But there were women who did write books that they wanted to be seen as not novels for women, and they wrote them under male names, because I think there was a sense that a woman could not write a book that was good on its own merits. Like, maybe she could write something that appealed to the ladies, and that was fine for, you know, the soft-minded ladies. But George Eliot was a woman. and I don't know about you, but I don't find that book to be full of soft, tender emotions and you know, people opening their hearts. You know, her books they're tough. But at the same time, to get that level of respectability, she took a male pen name.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of women did that. So I know all the Bronte sisters did, which is weird because their books are very female centric, and they still went out and were like, oh, if I want to be taken seriously, I need people to think a man wrote this.
Right. Wasn't Jane Austen published anonymously?
Yeah, she was published
By
as a lady, so
Okay.
everybody knew it was a woman, but they didn't know who. So
so I'm going to move a little bit forward because you I know you write historical romances, right, maybe around Regency periods and you know, things that I think are so fascinating. But in the 80s, 70s and 80s, of course, the books, now looking back at them, were like problematic. You know, we actually had a program, a virtual program, about bodice rippers and what was the appeal to them at that time. So going forward in time, do you think those books were dangerous for girls because they were kind of rapey, they were, you know, very alpha male, things like that?
Totally. So I wasn't there at the time, but
Sadly I was.
no. I mean, I've read them all since. You know, my understanding about it is that what was so revolutionary about those books is that it put sex on the page, and you had a heroine having sex and she didn't die. And if you look at most of literature, excluding romance, when a woman has sex on the page, she dies, or it does not go well. So these books, you know, problematic portrayals of sex for sure, but she got a happy ending after that. And
is that a pun? Is that supposed to be a pun?
it's not. I know. I pause every time I say it. I'm like, oh, what did I
it could be both.
She gets both. And like when I talked about it with my mom, she's like, you weren't allowed to ask for sex in those times. You weren't allowed, there's still this idea that women didn't really want it. So you kind of had to have the hero force it to get there. We can discuss, I wouldn't write this or promote that now necessarily, but I think it's an important part of the romance evolution. And I think it really changed the game for women writers in our women's fiction.
I think whatever romance is being written, even if it's about a historical or set in a historical time period, it tends to reflect the time period of the person writing it as well. And so things like women couldn't get their own credit cards separate of their husbands until 1974 or something insane like that. Like it was very difficult to break up a marriage. It was very difficult to live independently. It was difficult to get good jobs. I mean, how many women trailblazers like Ruth Bader Ginsburg told stories of essentially being they would be fully qualified lawyers and people would still ask them to go get the coffee and stuff like that as if they were a secretary. It wasn't easy. So I think some of the helplessness and the indignities visited upon the historical romance heroines of books written in the 70s and early 80s reflects that even women in the 1970s and 1980s weren't completely free and independent to do as they wished. And so I don't know, I was there for some of that part, but I couldn't read during it. And so I read them all years later. And I just remember thinking wow, this story is just so incredibly over the top. Like, it's not like one wild thing that happens to these people. It's 15 in a row. And then they get on a ship and they go to a new continent and 15 more wild things happen to them. It was just women's imaginations had just been simmering and finally the top blew off and every wild, amazing adventure that anybody could have, they're like, well, I'm going to write about this somehow. So, they're definitely interesting. If you read romances that were written in the 40s and 50s, you also get a very different feel about those books, because I just think people, as hard as you might try to immerse yourself in a historical world and say, I'm going to make this book really historically accurate and appropriate, you live in this world. And there are a lot of things about this world that we have internalized that make it into our stories.
Mm-hmm. Nancy has a good question about, do you see a distinction between writing for younger women versus older women, which was a question that I had too, in terms of where we've come in time with the Me Too movement and changes in that in perspective. So is there a difference?
Do you mean writing YA versus?
No, well, writing for younger women in their 20s and 30s, romance.
Yeah. Well, there's new adult romance, which is aimed at that crowd. And it is a little different, I think, than, I feel like there's just different expectations, I guess. What do you think, Maya?
I mean, young adult and new adult aside, mm-hmm. I think, the 25 to 85 thing kind of holds.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my grandmother was reading one of my first book, and I was like, I'll give you a copy where I pull out all the sex scenes, and she was like, don't you dare. And I was like, Grandma. So I don't think there's a huge difference. And I notice as I've grown up in romance, it still all works. The stories still work, the beats, mm-hmm. the pleasure I get from it, the escape, the things I want from it, it's all good. I will say that I am finding it interesting how hard it is to change the age of heroines. When I was 36, I went to my editor and I said, I want to write a 36-year-old heroine. And she said, that's too old. My editor was also 36 at the time. She's like, you can't do it. It'll be a disaster. But I did it and it was totally fine, and one of my favorite books and best books. But
Name it.
it's An Heiress to Remember. She's
There
a
you go.
Day. It's a
That's a
second
great
chance
book.
at love. And I'm seeing a trend now of like stories with older heroines, and I love how it changes the game, because it's like you're not trying to have an heir anymore. You're not trying to have kids in a family. Like it just changes things a little bit, the priorities, and the liberties.
Mhm.
The heroine's been married or widowed or whatever, it's just, she can have a lot more fun.
Mhm.
She has no F's left to give. She's like, done with all that.
Done with it.
Alex
36.
asked-
36. My first book I wrote, the heroine was 30, and a number of editors did pass on it. We're kind of like, well, we're not sure about this. It was like 30.
And that wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, you were first, yeah, because like, I mean, it's past those 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s where you have to be a 21 and a virgin, right?
I mean, I hope so. I read a romance the other day where the heroine was 20, and I did enjoy it, but there were times when I was just shaking my head like, oh, you poor child. You are going to look back on this and just wonder to yourself, like, what was I thinking? Why did I do these crazy things?
The author or the character?
The character. No, the author's lovely. I really like the author's books. It was a great book. I enjoyed it very much. But yeah, there were some things where I was like, oh, I'm too old to be reading a book like that.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. So Alex asks, if the traditional romance hero has to grow and develop as part of their character arc, was part of the denigration of romance for women due to the potential threat of the expectations this would raise about men's behavior? Is it a misogynistic reaction? Go ahead, Maya. I see you need to say something.
Okay, I have a half-written newsletter post, Exo Romance newsletter post about this. That's a great way of framing it, and I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, so like the patriarchy relies, right, on men being strong and unemotional and like holding that all inside. But to get to the happy ending in a romance novel, the guy's gotta like be emotionally vulnerable, and it's scary and dangerous. So yeah, I'm sure that's like a huge part of everything. Totally.
I think it's also the idea that a man would have to get himself in line to really have a successful relationship with the woman he wants, that the burden's not on her to adapt to him, that not that she's going to change him, but that he has to get his own stuff together. And yeah, I can see why some guys don't like that, and why people do say, oh, it creates unrealistic expectations. And I'm always like, just like speak for yourself. I feel like my husband is the total package. I'm not writing anything unrealistic. I'm happy. My husband's great. He's terrific. I don't know. I hold out. The guys are out there, I guess. Guys, take a lesson. You're having trouble in your relationship, read a few books and say, what could I possibly reflect on in myself? And
right. And it's not like also, and there's no like how to do that necessarily, but it's just, I think, seeing that it's okay and you're still like lovable and respectable and like accepted by your peers and everyone around you.
And you're still like you, a guy can still be, a manly man, and it doesn't have to be like, you give up your man card or whatever by being emotionally available to your spouse or your significant other, to your whole family. Most guys I know say they want to have a good relationship and they want to be involved, like with their children. And so I do think certainly modern society puts a lot of expectations on men that's a sign of weakness. And instead, I think what romance novels try to make the point is it's a sign of strength, that you don't have to be the stone pillar holding everything else up.
Mhm.
You can, you can be, form like a flying buttress, with your partner, where you hold each other up, you support each other, you draw strength from the other person being there, and they'll hold you up and you'll hold them up in turn.
Mhm.
So I don't view it as any kind of sign of weakness, but I think other people sometimes do.
Mhm.
I think Hollywood plays a part. They show guys like becoming sappy and doing these like grand, ridiculous romantic gestures sometimes that we're like, okay, nobody in real life would do that, but they show it in the movies and the rom-coms. And so
Yeah.
I think when people think of what expectations of romance novels giving, sometimes they're drawing in from rom-coms as well, where some of those gestures lean heavily into the comedic part and not the romantic part. You're like, okay, that's a very funny scene. But
Yeah, what like romance or a novel can do more than a Hollywood movie can is I think lean into that emotional development. So if you do get to a grand gesture, it's less spectacular and more like, oh, I understand where this is.
yeah, I feel like in books, the grand gesture is much more emotional as opposed to a big public display.
Right, right.
And sometimes, especially in movies, it can come across as really like the behavior is really stupid. So you're like, that's not funny. That I wouldn't want somebody to do that. Or they make the guy seem really dumb.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, the
that's not
suggestion
necessarily-
is you're, stupid with love, but like you don't have to be stupid.
Just the love part.
Nothing,
Right. So I'm going to come forward now to like maybe sort of currently, we went through the Me Too movement. Hopefully that will, stick. But romance is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It has increased its sales in the last few years, in fact, due to, during COVID. And it's really one of the highest read subgenres ever at all, right? So what does that mean in terms of who we're reaching? Because somebody said in the comments that, older women have the money and time to buy books, but I think it seems like more and more people are reading romance now of all ages.
I think so. It's always been big across all age groups. And I think what I've noticed, I'm glad it's growing. I think, and it's growing from like huge to more huge. But the shift I've noticed is that like we're talking about it more openly and like there's more media coverage around it from just more general sites. Like before we would have like a lot of really like niche romance review sites that we would go to find out about books. And now like Bustle or Oprah or whatever.
New York Times reviews
New York
romance novels now.
reviews romance novels now. So it's made it easier for more readers to find it. And then I think more comfortable for them to say like, I read this, you might like it. You can't make fun of me because I learned about it from the New York Times, and they're okay if they say it's okay. For better or for worse.
I'm personally a big fan of the book talk, but
Book talk is huge. I think that's where, I have my kids are in that age demographic, and yeah, TikTok is influential. I think TikTok is where people see stuff and they say, oh, that's cool. Sometimes it's stupid stuff they see on TikTok that they think is cool. It's like, no, don't eat the cinnamon or whatever, or the Tide Pod. But a lot of times they do see stuff. There's all kinds of stuff on TikTok, right? And, my daughter's like, oh, I learned how to clean something the other day on TikTok. And I'm like, wait, what? How many years did I try to show you how to clean stuff? It took a 2-minute TikTok video. You were looking sold. So
but what we're seeing is that the reach is further to all ages. And one of my questions really was about inclusion. There's so much more diversity in romance books now too. It's reaching a bigger audience there as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think that readership has always been there as well.
We just didn't see ourselves in the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's gotten better, but an author of color of mine recently said it's gotten like, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. So I don't think we can congratulate ourselves that like we've solved equal representation in romance yet, because we haven't. But I think we also have like the way romance novels empower women, have historically empowered women. I think it empowers, you know, marginalized communities and groups to really like tell their own story on their terms, to show themselves how they want to be portrayed, and to, you know, use these books to find community the way they've been used like that for ever, and then to show like we're a force to be reckoned with. So I support all of it.
And we deserve love too.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone.
Enjoy.
So, which brings me back to the dangerous part. Now that it feels like romance has sort of opened up so much, and more people are reading it, more diverse people are reading it, you know, with their own stories and all of that. Is there still that sense of these are dangerous books for girls? And you know, I know you have girls in your title, but I'm also thinking like the entire spectrum of sexuality. Are these books dangerous for people along that spectrum?
Of sexuality? I mean, I think, you know, what romance does is it says people are equal and deserve love and joy. And the more stories about more kinds of people that we can tell, we can show that, the better. So I think it works for queer romance, romance featuring characters of color by people of color. The framework works for any group. It's all about showing the equality between two people or more. Like, I'm not going to limit it to a couple. And it shows that everyone deserves love and a happy ever after.
Right. But do you think that in some, just like before, like, you know, people were intimidated by that, or they poo-pooed it because they wanted people to feel that and not read them? Do you think it's dangerous for there's some people that think it's still now it's dangerous for a larger audience?
Yeah,
I think like it's giving us ideas.
Yeah, I think the idea that romance gives is that you are unique and special and valuable, and you deserve love and acceptance. And I don't want to go too far down the road, but there are some people in this country who are trying to tell an entire population of people that basically they shouldn't even exist, let alone find happiness and acceptance. So I do think that a lot of the romance is still dangerous to the status quo.
I think it can be very dangerous to white supremacy. And I hope it is. But, you know, at the same time, it can be used the other way. So yeah, I think it definitely has the power to still subvert the status quo, whether it's patriarchy or white supremacy or all the jumbled up mix of that. And that's the romance I want to champion. But it can also be used the other way. What
do you mean the other way? I'm nodding, but I'm not quite sure I understand.
You know, every time we reinforce, for a while, there was a fight among romance authors many, many, many years ago to define romance as one man and one woman.
Oh, God. I remember that.
Wasn't that long ago.
It was a big fight. And, you know, we landed in two people, or we didn't go there.
I forget where they settled. I think it landed on two people, but that didn't last for very long. They were pretty quickly shouted down that no, there could be, why limit it?
We can, like, as authors, when we're choosing who our heroine is, who the hero is, who the love interest is for either of them, we're kind of making a statement about who's worthy of love. And we're making a statement about who is worthy of a reader's time investment, their financial investment, their emotional investment. And so we're making choices in the characters we choose to feature, in the stories we choose to tell, and how we choose to tell them. And then readers are also making that choice with the authors and stories they read. And so I think it's up to all of us to really try to move that to a more inclusive, much more inclusive stories and authorship and readership.
Mhm.
I just think, going back to your point, Mina, that more and more people are reading them and the reach is extending, and through new tools like Book Talk, I think that the more people read it, the more people will say, hey, I have an idea. I want to write a book about somebody like me or like my friend, or I just have this great idea that I want to write. And the more people are thinking about it, the more diversity of voices and viewpoints you're going to get. And that only makes the romance world richer and more beautiful, because now, like I believe romance is for everybody, period. And the more people who believe that they are valuable and worthy of that kind of love and closeness, I think that's just all to the better, right? You see how many people have mental health problems and how the surveys of teenagers say, I feel so alone, I feel isolated, I don't feel like I have any friends. Like, it's obviously a very human desire, a very human craving. Like, we all want to feel companionship. We're very social creatures for the most part. Even me, who doesn't leave the house for like 5 days in a row. But you still need that emotional connection and feedback with somebody somehow. So I think romance novels are tapping into a yearning for that.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I want to touch on something you said, Carolyn. Sometimes you don't see yourself in a story, so or you don't see the story you want to read, and so we start writing it. And that's how so many authors, romance authors I've talked to, got started. And I think it's so important when you see that there's an author like you that's doing it, so you can say, there's a pathway for me. There's a readership out there for this. So I think it's so important to kind of like those authors to be a beacon. And then this is also hugely important to have like tools and a community and a culture to move an author from aspiring author to published. And for a long time, Romance Writers of America served as that for many, but not all romance authors. And so I don't know if there is that today, but I think that's a really important thing I would love to see in the world, is just those tools that help these stories get told and published, and that the authors are compensated fairly for them.
I also think it would be good for readers to know that there probably is a lot more diversity of stories out there. It's just, there's so many stories, period, that it's really hard to find the ones you want. When you shop for books, you're shopping in a gigantic warehouse that has tons and tons of stuff. And it's almost guaranteed that there are some books in there that you will love. The problem is, how can you find them? And now that everything is so online and you're not reliant on your local bookstore having it on the shelf for you to even know it exists, I think for readers who are looking for any particular story, I would say, keep digging, keep looking. There's more and more stuff out there. There's more and more people are writing different kinds of books. People who wanted to be writers, who maybe thought, I have to write a certain kind of book. I can only write a young virginal heroine, and he has to be titled, he has to be a duke, and, but really inside they wanted to write something else. I think as the publishing world expands and some of the old guide rails fall away, people are saying more and more, well, I can write a story where the heiress falls in love with the footman and they run away together and are very happy. I can write a story where the well-to-do girl who's going to be a lawyer falls in love with the garbage man, and they have a great life together. So I think as more and more people enter the marketplace as readers, those markets grow and are created, and the people who write those stories, who take a chance, like Maya will probably remember a few years ago, publishers and editors would tell authors, like, essentially, you'll kill the book if you don't include these elements. You can write it, we'll put it out there, it won't sell anything, and then you'll be sorry. And nowadays, I think people are taking more of those chances and putting the books out there and saying, I think the market is out there, and I think I'm going to be able to find them.
Mhm.
And I hope, I hope the readers out there who want more variety and different things are really looking for them and taking a chance on, a book that's close, buy it, buy it and read it. Maybe it's not your ideal, but it'll be different. You'll support, you're encouraging authors to branch out, when you read their books in KU or get them from the library or buy them. It's all good to us.
And cheers to all of that, and cheers to librarians who can help you, can be your matchmaker to help you find what you're looking for.
Yeah, find yourself a librarian who loves romance, like Mina, who can be like, hey.
That's right. I've always thought of myself as a bartender, a book tender, but now
We'll
I'm
hear-
being the matchmaker.
Look it up, and whatever you want, there's probably something out there. And if you keep
Romance.
looking. Yeah.
Well, also, I think the rise of self-publishing has created a path for a lot of writers that they didn't have before. There's not the same
Exactly.
guardrails as there were. And so
Yeah,
that
that's
has
part of what I meant.
exploded. We have a program coming up on monster romance. We had one a few weeks ago and it was so popular. I was like, we have to do this again. And I never read monster romance. All of a sudden I'm like, wow, I have got to get into this. So, it's just, there's just always something new. Stories are always available, there's always something. I'm going to just get through some of the audience questions because I don't want to miss them. Elaine asks, is there anything you wouldn't put in a romance book? You personally, I think.
I can't do The Secret Baby. I just can't.
Thank you.
I feel like that's too big a secret to keep. But I could see somebody engineering a circumstance where it was a secret baby. It was like inadvertently secret, like she thought he was dead, and that's why she didn't tell him. But that one's it's just not for me.
Related note, I would say, and maybe I've done this, but I wouldn't do it anymore. The pregnancy scare that forces a marriage.
That feels a little too raw.
Choice taken away.
Thank you. Somebody wants to know if your spouses read your books.
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Make us all jealous. Tell us how he reads your books.
With an English accent. My husband is an actual British male, and with the whole remote, reserved, inaccessible emotions things, we joke, he's like, I have feelings like thirst, hunger, tired. So I think it's really funny that so many women romanticize that, but it's getting them to break it down, and he's good, it's all good. But he'll read first drafts and is a brutal editor, but really helpful.
How about you, Caroline?
He has read some of my books, but he reads all day. He reads nasty contracts, big long things. So I don't know how many he's read.
Romance, then. But.
I don't know. I'm trying to trick him by putting books on the Audible account and figuring maybe he'll open one up one day and listen to it on his commute. But
there you go.
He's pretty tough to fool.
Angela asks, speaking of the perception of romance as a genre, what do you think of the USA Today article about the formulaic nature of romance making it the perfect genre for AI to write, ignoring the fact that all other genres have formulas as well?
Why do people want to use AI to do things that so many people in this world want to do? How many people do you know who say, oh man, I want to write a book. I wish I could write a book. That's my dream, to write books. Why would you make AI do that? Make AI write your business emails. Make AI write the crap stuff that you don't care about, that nobody wants to do. Just
Don't take the fun.
Why would you want an AI to like create a movie for you? You know how many people want to create movies that will not be derived from everything that's been plugged into it before? Like leave that creative stuff to the humans. I don't think that romance is any more formulaic than mystery novels, which I've already gone on record as saying is my favorite genre to read for the along with romance. There's a formula to almost every type of fiction, except Game of Thrones, where he pretty much stuck his thumb in the eye of the formula, and that's how that turned out. I don't know. I don't know why people would want to do that. There are literally millions of people writing and publishing books in the romance genre. Why?
Laugh at like the lengths people will go to not pay writers.
Like, it's amazing. It's unbelievable.
Problems in the world.
And I have to tell you, the tech guys are going to want to get paid for that AI. So it's not even going to be cheap for long.
Yeah.
And they'll get paid more, which kind of stinks, right?
Yeah, it'll be like, oh, it's this custom product that, you put in all the inputs.
I think that readers are also very savvy. Like, we want to know that our stories are written by somebody with authentic, feelings and, thoughts and stuff like that.
Well, it goes back to like, especially with romance, it's the human connection. And like, one thing I think romance has had as long as I can remember is like, you can go talk to your author in real life at a book signing or now on social media. And it's just this very like, of course we're all gonna revel in this love we have together. And I think we'd all just be really missing out if AI was part of that.
I agree. I completely agree. I mean, like, romance readers become so upset about like some, kind of, like if somebody sent a book plate instead of signing the book themselves, kind of things. So how would we feel if we found out a book wasn't actually written by a person?
That'd be so gross.
Yeah, I would be very disappointed and angry.
Why?
Yeah.
Jennifer says, how has the marketing for romance changed over time? We talked about this a little bit earlier. And do you think it's changed for the better?
Oh,
wow.
How has marketing changed? Well, there used to be things like magazines. There was a monthly magazine called Romantic Times for many years, where I remember it because I think I'd only had a couple of books out, and a woman came up to me at an event and she didn't know who I was. So I introduced myself and she said, "What's the title of your book?" And I told her, and she kind of went, okay, I'm not going to remember. Was it reviewed in Romantic Times? And I said, yes. And she goes, okay, I buy all the books reviewed in Romantic Times. And like, that was her shopping list. They would review and whatever. I think she said like, oh, if it got 4 more stars in Romantic Times, I just always buy it. And I buy a lot of 3 stars too. And I was like, all right then.
Seriously, my mom would do that. She would just buy every like 3, 4, 5-star rated historical that month. Read them.
Yep.
And that was it. There was no like blogs.
But that was obviously a very limited set of the books that were put out. I mean, Romantic Times reviewed a lot, but they couldn't get to every book. And that was even before self-publishing really exploded and the number of books just went. So now I think you got to be readers. The burden is more on readers because unless your name is Julia Quinn, you're not getting a whole lot of publicity from your publisher in terms of reaching a really, really broad audience. And so it has shifted more from publishers have cut their budgets. And so it is more on authors to reach out, which is why all authors are on the social media platforms, even the ones who are shy and introverted. But it's also shifted on to readers. I think readers have to learn to know your keywords. What kind of books do you like? Romance is really great at dividing things into tropes. We tag our books, straight up tell you this is a road romance. They get stuck in a cabin, they get snowed in, there's only one bed. Like, we just label it on there. So if a reader really searches, I think, and really knows what they're in the mood for, they should be able to find their books. But it's definitely not as served up to you the way it once was with you know, like magazines and reviews in the paper, and like there's no way any review site could get to all the books.
Right.
But there are still some good ones out there.
What do you think, Maya?
I think all of that is correct. And I had thought about, you know, how much it's on authors to promote their books. But Carolyn makes a really great point of how much of it is on the readers now. So what I find useful, you know, besides, again, your local library and romance-friendly librarian, there's bookstores like the Ripped Bodice, where it's their romance. That's what they do. And you can sign up for their newsletter, and it's okay. It's a little more curated.
There's
other
tons
thing-
of sites. I mean, there's certainly like there's groups for whatever kind of whatever genres you want to read. There are groups on Goodreads. The bigger romance sites, like All About Romance, will definitely
Good night. I'm on a
they
live.
provide lists of books by genre, by topic. There are a number of sites like, oh goodness, what's it called? I think it's called Shepherd. I can't find it now, but there are definitely a lot more sites coming out for books that are attempting to organize books and sort them and let you know. And obviously, if you have a favorite author that you really like, you should sign up for their newsletter and find out. And if you don't want to get newsletters, you can follow them on Amazon or BookBub if you want to find out when their books are on sale. Some authors, like I think Julia Quinn still recommends a historical romance, I think like every Monday, maybe. But romance-friendly bookstores will also be able to provide you with a list. You know, if you like X, here's 10 more books that we think you'll really like. And there are a lot of sources, you know, you just kind of have to go looking a little for them.
You're on mute.
Oops.
And I have a cat face too. I think you're right, though, that it's more on the reader to find the authors and the books that they like, as before it was. But you know, there's pros and cons to both. Like, I was really, as much as I hate Twitter, I love Twitter because all of the authors that I love are on it, and now they're all over the place and I don't see them anymore. So it's been a fracturing of like that one place where I knew I could find anything. So we are actually about out of time, and I did want to ask.
Did we get to all the questions? I just hate to get people with questions.
Let's see. I didn't get to.
Are we good?
all of them.
Okay.
If you don't mind staying for another minute or two.
Yeah, fine.
I'm okay.
Lisa says, how do you think authors will address Roe v. Wade being overturned in books going forward? And this sort of is an interesting question for me, because I think, how does romance in general deal with upheaval in the world?
I did a panel at the Boston Book Festival last fall, and somebody asked about a question similar to that. And I had just read, by coincidence, 2 books like in the month previous where they had been written during the pandemic, although they were not set in the pandemic. So one of them was a contemporary, but it didn't mention the pandemic. And I noticed that a lot more characters were having mental health issues like anxiety and depression. And I couldn't help but think that like that's the pandemic, like that's the world around us seeping into authors and expressing itself in our stories. And so I think the question of Roe v. Wade and the removal of something that saves women's lives. I mean, I've had friends who had, you know, ectopic pregnancies and stuff, and they would have died without abortion care. There's no question. So to see going back to the era where like my books and Maya's books are set, where an ectopic pregnancy meant you were dead. That was just, there was no help for it. You were dead. And that's why so many, you know, that's why you have so many widows and widowers. People died. And I find it amazing that our country is saying we want to go back to that, like bring back the good old days of maternal mortality rates through the roof. So I'm sure it will show up. I'm sure it will show up a lot more in contemporaries, but I know a lot of historical authors who were like, I think Grace Burroughs once talked about, if I don't want to write about abortion in my stories, but if, I can come up with a good story that brings the issue up and shows people both sides of it and how crucial that this was and it is in the modern world, she's like, I'm going to do it because those are stories I want to write.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the fine line we walk is we write stories that people want to escape from, or sorry, escape to. You want to escape from the world that just told you your life didn't really matter and your personal autonomy was irrelevant. So we don't want to like think about that. We turn to a romance novel to get off Twitter and the news. But at the same time, you want in those stories, in that escape, you want to feel seen and to feel like your characters are fully developed and they connect and there's an emotional connection and they're valid and that they get to have, agency and choice and like, as Carolyn said earlier, we are writing about today with today's point of view. It's going to show up, whether we're writing historical or we're writing contemporaries, and whether it's obviously upset about Roe v. Wade decision or it sneaks in other ways, it's going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a reader, it will help process feelings about it, understand feelings about it, and inspire us to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And do
we're also we're writing stories where people are accepted and valued and really come to say, I am the hero of my own story. I am in charge of my life. I will shove aside my nasty, terrible family or shake off, these friends or, whatever bad situation I'm in. I can rise above it and find something that will make me happy. And if you can't control what's going on with your own body, how can you control the rest of your life? So I just feel like personal autonomy, being able to make your own decisions is such a huge part of the way romance characters find their way to that happily ever after state. Yes, it's an escape, but people also want to relate to our characters. I mean, if you write somebody who is unbearably perfect, like they never make mistakes, I mean, people say that all the time. Like, I could not finish this book. This heroine was too stupid to live. This heroine was, a Mary Sue. The hero was a jerk. The hero was, she should run from him as fast as she could. Like, we definitely want to see admirable things in the characters that we identify with and say, yes, I feel you. I mean, how many women in this country, around the world now, have miscarriages? And so I've definitely seen more books with characters dealing with pregnancy loss, dealing with infertility, dealing with deciding, they don't want to have children at all for, whatever reason. And that's, good for them. So yeah, I think that the element of autonomy and choice is woven pretty hard into pretty much every romance novel these days.
So I'm going to sort of end with where we started from about dangerous books, and the thing that I'm hearing that people that think it's dangerous for anybody is that they don't understand why we read them. Is we're looking for that, everybody deserves love, but also that it's a filter for us to like deal with very difficult things in a very accessible way. Mm-hmm. Some of the best books I've read are very hard to read, but they left me like feeling like so good. I was like, yes, they can handle anything together, right? So
yeah, I mean, there's like a whole school of scientific study about how fiction works in our brain and the job it does. And my daughter, who you met earlier, she's in the first grade and she's learning about fiction and nonfiction books. And to her, nonfiction books are and they teach them this in school, and it makes me want to scream, learning about the world books. And fiction somehow isn't. And I want to scream because fiction is how we learn about the world. It's how we internalize things. It is every novel we read is like a trial run for what would I feel like? What would I do? What would this experience be like? So we learn so much from them. And the beautiful thing about it is that they can be so fun at the same time.
Yes. It doesn't have to be all tragedy and tears. It can have the happily ever after, right?
Hopefully.
Maybe the one thing that every romance book has to have is the happily ever after, whatever the journey is to get there.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I think that is the rule.
Oh.
However many participants you have, you hit a state where you're like, we are happy together, and world, watch out.
That's right. There's none of that like happy for now kind of thing.
Happy for now can be a decent ending for a romance novel. As long as you feel like they're on a course, they have a chance. Like, I don't know. I don't even want to say it has to be, everything has to be happily ever after forever and ever and ever, because, sometimes, we write a lot of divorce characters, right? There's a lot of people love the second chance romance. If we were lovers and then we split up and now we're back together. And so I don't know. I just think I think romance tries to reflect as much of the scope of real human life as authors can put into their books. So
yep. And for some people that is dangerous.
Exactly.
Is interesting. We can beat them up a little bit. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like I've learned so much, and I have a lot to think about now about why I read romance and love it so much, and want to beat up the patriarchy around it. So thank you for all of your insightful thoughts, and for sharing it with us and your time. I know you're busy writing books.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, this was very, very fun. Thank you, Mina.
You're welcome. And Caroline, I will see you on May 20th at RomCon in Ashland.
Yes.
With
yes.
11 other romance writers.
Coming to Ashland.
That's right. Oh, field trip.
Oh, we tore up Concord last year. Now we're coming to Ashland.
That's right. Maya,
I imagine all your librarian friends are like, ooh, how can we get one of those at our library?
They are. I'm the envy of the town. So if any of you are local, come to Ashland on May 20th and meet Caroline in person. Yep. And maybe we can entice Maya to come up for a little visit as well.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.